Hello everyone, and welcome to the Mortuary. I am the Mortician, and today we get to discuss one of my favorite genres of metal, doom metal. I gotta really contain myself because I'll be rambling forever about a lot of these bands. So doom metal. We have to ask the question first, what is doom metal? The most basic way that I could put it for someone who has, assuming you have zero knowledge of the genre, but you know about heavy metal such as Judas Priest or Black Sabbath or something like that. Basically, if you could take Judas Priest or like Heavy Load or any of these other bands, like these heavy metal bands, and you could just slow them down, that's basically what doom metal is. It's a much slower, much more atmospheric and ambient genre. But that's not to say there aren't head-bangable riffs, because that's what fucking doom metal is about, right? It's slow and slow, down-tuned guitars, really slow, hypnotic, groovy riffs that just act as a fucking earworm. It's an absolutely lovely genre. I cannot wait to discuss it. So let's get right into the gradient, and then we can get into the subgenres. First band we have here is actually a band that's described as both doom and new wave of British heavy metal, which we can talk about the new wave of British heavy metal in a later video when I discuss heavy metal as a genre. But that is Pagan Altar. And the album that I have here is the album that I recommend, and that is Judgment for the Dead. Pagan Altar is exactly as I described. If you could take Judas Priest and just slow them down and add some pentatonic blues soloing, that's basically what you get, is Pagan Altar. The biggest difference from the shift between a band like Judas Priest, if you're into Judas Priest, and Pagan Altar is definitely the vocal style. Now, the thing about doom metal is that there's not really a prescribed vocal style for doom metal, whereas heavy metal and death metal and black metal, etc., typically have a vocal style that accompanies it. Doom metal necessarily doesn't even have that kind of a thing. And doom metal can range from folky to operatic to really raw and just, I wouldn't say not good singing, but just really raw and uncut, unfiltered singing to, black metal screams to low death growls, etc. It really runs the gamut. But for standard doom metal, the most you'll find, most of those two vocal styles you'll find are the folky or raw and uncut and the operatic. Those two are really common. And Pagan Altar falls in the definitely falls into folky or more raw vocal style. So that's probably one thing that's going to be a little bit hard to get used to, but even if you're listening to Judas Priest or something, it's going to be really hard for you to make the transition, or I imagine it'd be really hard to make the transition from someone like Rob Halford or Bruce Dickinson to Messiah Mark Collin. But Pagan Altar's instrumentation is just the same, almost just the same as a Judas Priest album, but like I said, much slower, much more hypnotic, much more groovy, and solos are basically more or less the same you would find on an older Judas Priest record. So this is a really good starting point for anyone who wants to get into doom metal but doesn't know much. Next, we get into the more operatic vocal style here with Candlemass's Nightfall. People who are seasoned veterans of doom metal will probably be like, oh, that's such an obvious choice, which it really is. There's really no getting around listing Candlemass on the doom metal recommendations list. Like, you just can't. If you're talking about doom metal and you're trying to get a beginner into it, Candlemass is going to be one of the first names that roll off your tongue. And it's simply because they were so genre defining. Not necessarily this album, but they dropped the album Epicus Doomicus Metallicus, which really set in stone the idea of what true doom metal would be. And Nightfall just pushed that boundary even further. Nightfall definitely has slow, catchy, hypnotic riffs. It's way more atmospheric than any heavy metal album you will listen to. The vocal style is really over the top. Like I said, it's basically if you listen to opera and put like really slow guitars and really, I don't want to say groovy because that's wrong, but really hard hitting, heavy drums in the background. That's basically the best way I could describe Candlemass, and it's absolutely incredible. And if you want to hear basically all the elements that I'm talking about when it comes to Candlemass and this style of doom in general, I would really recommend that you listen to Candlemass's Well of Souls. That'll give you kind of an idea of what doom metal can do in terms of the more over-the-top stuff. It's very atmospheric, very lovely. And speaking of atmosphere, speaking of different vocal styles, we're going to get into the subgenre that I love. Like, I love this subgenre. And this is the last stop that you should take, because this subgenre that we're about to talk about, the last stop on the gradient, is the most extreme because it tends to be the slowest. It lacks the most. It definitely lacks any kind of groove or anything. It's basically about immersing yourself in the most sad while epic sound you possibly can, and that's funeral doom. For that, I definitely recommend you listen to Evoken's Embrace the Emptiness. This album, as well as there's a couple other albums here in the actual recommendations, but this one is definitely the penultimate when it comes to funeral doom. It's everything you can expect. There's really deep growls here. There's really, 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 really slow guitar riffs that just really get into your fucking head and just make you like go back and forth. There's some interesting uses of reverb that really basically ensnare you in the atmosphere of the album. So it's like you're almost in a different place when you listen to it. There's clean guitars littered throughout the heavy guitars that really, really give good contrast, and there's some excellent use of keyboards. All of these things you can expect in funeral doom. It's basically about taking the genre to its most extreme limits, to its most slow, to the most slow depths, to the most atmospheric heights you possibly can, and ensnare it in an album. That's what funeral doom is. And that's what Evoken's Embrace the Emptiness does. And it is an incredible album, and you should be listening to it. Okay? Let's recap real quick, and then we'll go over my recommendations and my different ideas about the subgenres, okay? So you have Pagan Altars, Judgment of the Dead. This should be your first stop. Without a doubt, this should be your first stop. Candlemass's Nightfall should be the next on your list. And lastly, you should be checking out Evoken's Embrace the Emptiness. Now, we have a few CDs here. Some of them are subgenres we've actually covered, so I'm going to do those first. Actually, this is slightly out of order. Classic. There we go. Some of these are subgenres we've already covered. So we're going to do those first. So we have Death Doom. Death Doom is just... We've already covered Death Doom. It's basically if you could just take death metal and just slow it down quite a bit, but maintain its aggression. That's what Death Doom is. There's really nothing incredibly special about Death Doom. In terms of new things to say in the light of doom metal, from the perspective of a doom metal fan, I would say this is as good of a genre as Death Doom is. It really is just basically for death metal gods. So you have Hooded Menaces, Effigies of Evil, which I brought up, in the death metal video. And then I wanted to actually touch upon a different band and a slightly different genre within Death Doom, just so we're not just completely retreading the same water. I decided to go with October Tide's Tunnel of No Light. It is Death Doom, but it's melodic Death Doom. We touched on both of these topics in my death metal video. Basically, when you add melodic to the beginning of any genre, it does what it sounds like. It just adds melody. So you can have these really hard hitting, slow, beat you over the head with a bat kind of riffing and drumming, but you add a sense of, I don't want to keep using the term melody, but you basically just add a sense of, I wouldn't say happiness, but it could be like happiness or sadness. It really is more emotional and more touching and more personal than what death metal and other subgenres can do. So you could take melodic and basically just add a tinge of like sadness or whatever. And yeah. Next we have two Funeral Doom recs. We're going to touch on Funeral Doom again anyway, because I'm going to take every fucking second I can to talk about Funeral Doom. We'll just go over them briefly. Like I said, I already went over what Funeral Doom was, so we have Mournful Congregations, Monad of Creation. Absolutely excellent Funeral Doom. And then we have Skepticism's Stormcrow Fleet. The biggest difference between Skepticism and Evoken, and there's not really, I wouldn't say there's a huge mega difference between Mournful Congregation and Evoken, but the huge difference between Skepticism and Evoken is that Skepticism uses, instead of using clean guitars and just normal keyboards to build their atmosphere, they really like to use organs. I mean, like, really like to use organs. I'm pretty sure it's either this album, I'm pretty sure it's this album, that the first song just is like immediately hits you in the face with like a really hard pipe organ sound. And it's absolutely incredible. It's over the top in its epicness and really, really, really soaks you into it. It's awesome. Next, we're going to talk about Stoner Doom and Sludge. So the album I decided to pick is actually because it kind of touches on both genres. I could have picked. I'm gonna give you two recommendations for Sludge, but I think that this album can kind of sum up both genres kind of nicely, and that's Electric Wizard's Dope Throat. So now, Stoner Doom as a genre, there's not really too much different in terms of style, I would say. A lot of Stoner Dooms don't typically use distortion or a normal distortion. What they'll do is they'll use a fuzz pedal. And that's no different here. This album actually made the FZ2 pedal by Boss famous. And basically the difference between a distortion and a distortion will basically make it so you can basically get that sound of that amp clipping really hard and get it real nice and clean. It compresses the signal, etc. But a fuzz is like, if you could take a distortion pedal or an overdrive and just basically give it steroids, it's a far more ferocious sound. It's a much, much more aggressive sound almost. You couldn't really use a fuzz for death metal. I mean, you could try, but you really can't, because it's really so intense that it misses the nuance of a lot of what you're trying to play. So when you play with the fuzz pedal, at least in my experience, you really have to rely on rhythmic patterns almost. And that's kind of where, once again, we've already talked about how Doom is very riff heavy, and Stoner Doom tends to be even more so riff heavy and even tuned lower in a lot of instances. For example, on Electric Wizard's Dope Throne, they're playing in drop A, which, if you're not familiar with tunings, the standard tuning for a guitar is E, A, D, G, B, E. You're basically playing, that would be so many fucking drop down. So when you drop, so this would be playing C standard, which is 2 or 3 steps down. I think it's 3 full steps down. And then you would do a full step downwards from C to get to A. It's really, really fucking low. And there are even bands that go lower than that. Like, I'm pretty sure Conan plays in G standard, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure that they do, which is even lower than drop A. It's absolutely incredible. So to go inside with stoner doom, you have a genre called sludge. Basically, sludge metal is like if you could take stoner doom, right, and you mix it with like crust punk or something, or hardcore. So you take these two genres and you slap them together, and you get bands like Primitive Man and Brain Oil. So the band that I'm going to recommend, well, I'm going to recommend both these bands, an album for both these bands. Oh god, it's fucking heartburn. I'm going to link both bands' Bandcamp in the description, because I don't own any sludge albums physically, because they're actually kind of hard for me to find. I don't know why, but I can't really find Brain Oil or Primitive Man records physically anywhere. But Brain Oil, I'm going to recommend Singularity to Extinction. Really awesome stuff. It'll give you a good idea about what sludge can be. And the next one we have here is Primitive Man's Home is Where the Hatred Is. Once again, how do I describe Primitive Man? Primitive Man isn't exactly like Brain Oil is pretty. I would say is pretty standard. Primitive Man is probably one of the most intense fucking things we're gonna talk about out of here, because it's not just regular sludge metal. It's like blackened sludge or something. It's really, really fucking heavy, and I really don't recommend you listen to Primitive Man unless you have previous experience with both black metal, death metal, doom metal, etc. Because it really takes all of those things and like slaps them together, and you get this really fucking intense, almost noise sound. So if you're going to listen to Primitive Man, you can't be a bitch. That's basically what it comes down to. Don't be a little bitch when you listen to Primitive Man, and you'll be fine. So the next genre that we're going to be talking about is Black Doom. The reason I'm saving this genre for last is because I don't really have as much to say about it. I'm not as huge into the genre. Not that I don't love it, because what I've heard from Black Doom artists I absolutely adore. It's just one of those things where I'm not as well versed in the genre because it's still kind of new to me, but I think I should still wreck it just for the sake of completion. And that album that I will recommend, which once again you'll find this band's album in the description, is Tom Hett's Neoteric Emptiness. This album is incredible, and it will sum up Black Doom probably better than I could. You really should just listen to it. I've already gone over what black metal is. We know what doom metal is because I've spent the last, 17 to 20 minutes talking about it. So thank you guys for watching. But before I go, we have to talk about two albums that I recommend that everyone should check out. The first album is St. Vitus's Mournful Cries. Incredible. St. Vitus's entire discography is just really good. But I love Mournful Cries. It's actually probably one of my favorite albums of all time. I love Dragon Time. That's probably one of my favorite doom metal songs. And when I started making doom metal myself, that's the song that really inspired me and made it click and go, okay, this is the kind of sound that I want to try and go for. And it's absolutely incredible. Mournful Cries by St. Vitus. Definitely check it out. And the last one we have here, last recommendation, is Reverend Bizarre's Crush the Insects. Reverend Bizarre is everything that we've basically talked about. They definitely have instances of, really good atmosphere. They've got the fuzz. They've got the really over-the-top vocals, and it's very folky. It's not operatic, but it's very folky. It's very groovy. They have really over-the-top lyricism, which that's also a really big thing in doom metal that I should have mentioned, but I didn't because I'm stupid. It's just absolutely fun to listen to. And the song I would actually recommend off this album is, I would actually recommend Cromwell. That'll probably sum up everything, everything that you'll hear on that album. It's a really good song, and I highly recommend it. So thank you guys for watching. Please tell me what you guys think about the doom metal as a genre. Tell me if I did a good job. Like this video, subscribe, whatever. Mortician, peace out.